Lillahi ta'ala. Correct your intentions. Barakallahu fikum. Let's continue in the Bayquniyyah poem in Hadith terminology. And we can just review real quick up to where we reached. The author said, أبدأ بالحمد مصليا على محمد خير نبي أرسلا. I start with the praise as one who makes salat upon Muhammad, the best prophet sent. وذي من أقسام الحديث عدة وكل واحد أتى وحده. And these are some of the divisions of the hadith numbered, counted. 34 we said, 34 categories. And each one came with its definition. And here, when he says each one, meaning each type, each category came with its definition, he means with its definition or an example. He means it comes with its definition or an example. You'll see. أولها الصحيح وهو ما اتصل إسناده ولم يشذ أو يعل. The first of them is the Sahih, the sound hadith. So I usually translate it as authentic, and a lot of people translate it as sound. And that's really closer translation, sound. Sahih literally means healthy. So sound. A sound hadith meaning an authentic one, meaning a hadith that has fulfilled the highest conditions of acceptability. So if I ask you, what is a sahih hadith? You're going to say, it is a hadith that has fulfilled the highest conditions of acceptability. وَهُوَ مَا اتصل إسناده وَلَمْ يَشُذ أَوْ يُعَلْ. It is that which its chain of narration is connected, and it was not irregular nor defective. We explained what those mean. يرويه عدل ضابط عن مثله معتمد في ضبطه ونقله. A trustworthy, precise one narrates it from his like. And we already said that's with continuous chain. Each one in the chain is trustworthy and precise. And by precise here, we mean the highest level of precision, because we're talking about Sahih Hadith. Highest level of precision is the memory that we talked about. Lower level of precision is the accurate documentation with the protection and preservation of one's books. This one who is trustworthy and precise is معتمد في ضبطه ونقله, reliable in his precision, in his accuracy, and in his naql, his transmission or his documentation. Yani, you can rely on him to take the hadith from him. The acceptable narrator to the hadith scholars is called hujjah, evidence, the narrator himself. The acceptable one is hujjah, evidence. والحسن المعروف طرقا وغدت رجاله لا كالصحيح اشتهرت. And the fair hadith is the one with known pathways, and its men became not like the sound hadith famous. Yani, its men became famous not like the men of the sound hadith. Not like them how? In precision. Like them in trustworthiness, but not like them in precision. Their precision is less. And that is the true differentiator between the Hasan and the Sahih. And we mentioned what the author says here about the Hasan being a hadith with known pathways. It's not a condition for a hadith to be Hasan that it has numerous pathways. وكل ما عن رتبة الحسن قصر فهو الضعيف وهو أقساما كثر. And all of what from the rank of fairness falls short, then it is weak, and it is in divisions. And it in divisions multiplied became many. Ahlan wa sahlan. We said why the weak hadith multiplied in types, because there are so many conditions of acceptability, 6 in total. For any missing condition is a weakness, because a weak hadith is, by definition, a hadith that lacks one or more of the conditions of acceptability. So by missing one condition, that's a weakness, and it depends on which out of those conditions it's missing. Each missing one would be a different weakness, a different kind of weak hadith. Then you can start making combinations. 2 missing conditions, and which 2, and then 3, and which 3, and so the result is many, many kinds of weak hadiths. وما أضيف للنبي المرفوع وما لتابع هو المقطوع. And what is attributed to the Prophet is marfu', raised, elevated. And what is for a successor of the companions, is maqtu', severed. These are technical terms. Most important is to know the Arabic words. Marfu', maqtu', sahih, da'if, hasan, and other important words like adl, dabit, and other words like isnad and matn. والمسند المتصل الإسناد من راويه حتى المصطفى ولم يبن. And the musnad hadith, if we want to translate that as linked, it is the one with the continuous chain from its narrator to the selected one. Meaning, by definition, a musnad hadith is a marfu' hadith, a prophetic one. But not merely a marfu' hadith, because when you say a hadith is marfu', that doesn't mean it has a connected chain. When it does, then it takes a new name, which is musnad. Musnad is al-marfu' al-muttasil, prophetic hadith with a continuous chain. وَلَمْ يَبِن. And it was not interrupted, that continuous chain. وَمَا بِسَمْعِ كُلِّ رَاوٍ يَتَّصِلْ إِسْنَادُهُ لِلْمُصْطَفَى فَالْمُتَّصِلْ. And that which by the hearing of each narrator, its chain connected to the selected one, then it is muttasil. That which by the hearing of each narrator, its chain is connected, is continuous back to the selected one, then it is muttasil, connected. And we mentioned that to be a muttasil narration, to use this name for a narration, it's not a condition that it is a prophetic hadith. Though that's what seems to be what the author is saying here, because he said, and that by the hearing of each narrator, its chain goes back to al-Mustafa, so he qualified it. Then it's muttasil, he says. And we said it's not a condition to be muttasil that it goes back to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. It's going to be muttasil by merely having a continuous chain. So it could be muttasil back to the Prophet, or muttasil back to a Sahabi, or muttasil back to someone else. If it were a muttasil hadith that is a prophetic hadith, then it's going to be called what? Musnad. So take good care to understand that. A narration is going to have a name by regarding one quality of it. And it would have a name, a different name, by regarding more than one quality of it. And one of those qualities alone, by one of those qualities alone, it would have had a different name. But by the combination of some qualities, it's going to have another name. By merely being attributed to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, it's going to be called marfu'. By merely having a continuous chain, it's going to be called muttasil. But when a narration is marfu' and muttasil, then it's called musnad. And that's as far as we got last time. So now we want to talk about the musalsal. That's the next one in the author's poem. He said, rahimahullah, مسلسل قل ما على وصف أتى مثل أما والله أنباني الفتى كذاك قد حدثنيه قائما أو بعد أن حدثني تبسما. Musalsal, a series. Now, how does he define it? He's going to define it by an example. So that clarifies the scope of his intent in the beginning of the poem when he said, وَكُلُّ وَاحِدٍ أَتَى وَحَدَّهُ. Each one came with its definition. He didn't actually give a definition for each one. Sometimes he gave an example instead of a definition. Like here. He said, Musalsal, series. Qul, say, in giving an example instead of a definition, Ma ala wasfin ata. It is something that came with a description. Well, this is not an accurate definition of musalsal, just these words alone. Musalsal has more elaborate definition than this. قل ما على وصف أتى. The musalsal say it is something that came with a description. So no. But he means something here. As a poet, he is restricted to the meter, to the beat. So he has to compact his words sometimes. And what he means is, say the musalsal is a narration that came with a particular description. على وصف أي وصف معين, having a particular description. أتى. That's how it came. Then he gave an example. مثل, like, أما والله أنباني الفتى. For a narrator to say, Wallahi, by God, the young man told me. And then the next narrator after him says, by God, the young man told me. He said, for example, by God, the young man told me. And it keeps going. Everyone in the chain saying the same thing. كذاك قد حدثنيه قائما. Or, like for the narrator, each narrator to say, he told me the hadith while standing. So each one would say, from Fulan, and he told me the hadith while standing. That Fulan told him the hadith while standing from Fulan, who told him the hadith while standing, for example. أو بعد أن حدثني تبسما. Or, for example, after he told me the hadith, he smiled. So then each narrator would say it. From Fulan. Yani, Fulan told me, uh, and after he told me the hadith, he smiled. That Fulan told him like that. And after he told him the hadith, he smiled. That Fulan told him. So that's Musalsal. And he didn't clearly define it, but he gave examples. And even these examples, because of being restricted to the meter, are not clear for someone who lacks some knowledge. You won't maybe know what he's saying without some explanation here. Because it's not clear from his words that each one is saying the same thing. Unless that's covered by the mere word musalsal here. Musalsals, a series. قل, say, ما على وصف أتى. It is what came with a particular description. مثل, like. أما والله أنباني الفتى. By God, the young man told me. كذاك قد حدثنيه قائما. And likewise, he told me the hadith standing. أو بعد أن حدثني تبسما. Or after he told me the hadith, he smiled. So the meaning here is that each narrator was saying that. So this is not concerning whether the hadith is authentic or not, nor is it concerning whether it's attributed to the Prophet or not, alayhi salatu wassalam. Rather, this is concerning a quality that exists sometimes in the chain of narration. Now, there's plenty to say there, but we're just sticking to the metin for now. Then he goes to the next one. Azizu marwi ithnaini aw thalatha. Azizu marwi ithnaini aw thalatha. Okay. So the next type of hadith is al-aziz. This word in Arabic could mean supported, or it could mean rare. If it is supported, if that's why it's called aziz, because it's supported, then this means that it has two routes, at least, not less than two routes at each level. At each level means from the companions, at least two people narrated it. From the tabi'un, at least two people narrated it. When we say at least, that means could be more than two, but never lower than two. That's why he said here, Marwi ithnaini aw thalatha. The aziz is the narration of two or three. By saying aw thalatha or three, he signals to the condition that to be aziz, it cannot be less than two. And it's not a condition to be only two. It's not a condition to be only two.
The
Yes?
voice went away a little bit. Can you
Okay.
go back like a couple sentences? May God reward you.
Yeah. Aziz. Yeah. So the Aziz is the next type of hadith the author wants to speak about here. And this word Aziz, it is an adjective. And it could mean supported, or it could mean rare. If it means supported, then that's because this kind of hadith always has another narration. Yani, because it's not narrated by less than two. Never less than two. It's not accurate to say the hadith is aziz if it's narrated two by two. No. Rather that at any level, it's never less than two. And that's why he said, oh, thalatha, or three. Azizu marwi ithnaini, oh, thalatha. Aziz is the narration of two or three, meaning never less than two. Or Aziz could mean rare. And if that's why this type of narration is called Aziz, it's because narration from two in particular is rare. And some scholars, they said, if Aziz means two from two from two, two narrators from two narrators from two narrators at every level, then this doesn't even exist. And that's granted. Therefore, the right meaning of Aziz is that not less than two at any level. مشهور مروي فوق ما ثلاثة. And the mashhur, the famous, is the narration above three. That's what he said here. And the mashhur, the famous narration, is marwi fawqa ma thalatha, the narration above three. And as for this word ma here, it's called zaida. It's extra. Sometimes the poet uses something called zaid, an extra word. It helps him to preserve the beat and does not alter the meaning. So he really means marwiyun fawqa thalatha, and ma here is zaida, it's extra. That means doesn't have a translation. But this statement is disputable because what's famous to the scholars is that mashhur is the narration of more than two. The narration of more than two, not the narration of more than three. The narration of more than three is at least four. So mashhur is the narration of at least three at each level. So also another interesting thing in the author's presentation. Let's take a look here.
The
Yes?
mashhur is the narration of more than two. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Because I think you said later you said it more than three, which is
That's
a
what the
slip of
author
the tongue.
said.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
He said, مشهور مروي فوق ما ثلاثة فوق ثلاثة. He said more than three. And this is disputable because what's famous is that mashhur is narration of more than two, meaning at least three. So we saw all of what the author said until we got to where we started today. He mentioned the Musalsal, the series. Then he mentioned the Aziz, the narration of two or three. Then he mentioned the Mashhur. He said the narration of more than three. Where's the narration of a single one? So he didn't put it here. So that leaves me waiting for two things. Now I'm still waiting for the Mawkuf, what's attributed to a companion. And now I'm waiting for the Gharib, what's peculiar to one narrator. So, what did he say next? After talking about Mashhur. But before that, before we see what he said next, when we say Aziz, not less than two, and Mashhur, not less than three, that's correct way. Are we talking about authenticity? Also, we are not talking about authenticity. We are talking about the number of routes. So you must separate each element so that you can investigate each one by one, each meaning one by one. The meaning of the number of narrators, the meaning of the um, acceptability of the report, the meaning of the connectivity of the chain, etc. The meaning of to whom the narration goes back to. So after he talked about the mashhur, he started with this next type, al-mu'an'an. He said, mu'an'anun ka'an sa'idin an karam. Mu'an'anun ka'an sa'idin an karam. Another example of defining not by actual definition, but by example. Because he said the mu'an'an is like an sa'id, an karam, meaning the way the chain of narration goes is that the word an repeats, which means from. So an fulan, an fulan, an fulan, an fulan, from so and so, from so and so, from so and so, from so and so. This is called an'ana, this succession of the word an, from. Now this is actually an important type. All of them are important, but some of them have some significant meanings for us. First question is, if there were a chain like this, is it considered continuous chain? An fulan, an fulan, an fulan, that's a continuous chain? So the answer is yes. Yani, originally. Is it possible to use this style to hide something? Yes, it is. Could someone use this style to hide a narrator? Yes, he might. How's that? Like someone heard from someone. Who heard from someone? And this one he heard from, he didn't want to mention it for some reason or another. He didn't want to tell you where he got what he's saying from. And so he deliberately skips that one, but he also doesn't want to lie to you. So he tells you where it's from. And he says, An Fulan, from so and so, but actually skipping someone. And if you don't know better, then you would think that he just gave you a continuous chain. But he actually gave you a rigged chain, a manipulated one that has been compromised, a chain that has trickery, forgery, if you want. Let's not say forgery. Let's reserve forgery for lying. He's not lying here. He's telling you the truth, but he's not telling you, as they say, the whole truth. That doesn't mean it's a lie, though. Don't say like the kuffar say. The kuffar say if you leave out a detail, you're lying. That's called lying by omission. If someone says that to you, you say, then you lie all the time. I'm sure you don't say everything all the time. So simple. Stop lying if you leave out information. It's just summarizing, being brief. And it could be an amount of deception if it is to give you a wrong impression, but it's not a lie. If we define a lie as saying what is contrary to reality while knowing reality, and that's how we define it. Yani, the word kadhib, that's translated as lie, then we're going to explain that word lie like it's explained, like kadhib is explained, because that's the religious definition here. To say something contrary to reality while knowing reality, that's a kadhib. And this one who might hide a reporter from you, he's not lying to you. in the way he says what he says. Okay, I understand. So that's still a connected chain? Uh, yes, as long as we don't know that the one who produces this chain is a trickster. If the one who produces this chain is a trickster, then we will not consider it a connected chain without him explicitly saying that he heard from the one he's narrating from. We will not consider it an explicit a connected chain without him explicitly saying that he heard from the one he's narrating from. Interesting. So someone might say, why we just don't reject this guy altogether? Seems we can't trust him. So the answer is because he's not a liar. He's not a liar. Yani, if he were to say to you, I heard from so and so, then we're going to take it. Because actually, he's not a liar. Even when he manipulated the chain in that way, he didn't lie to you. He's not a liar. So this is important then. I'm going to take a lesson from that. This is what the scholars said. These scholars are not naive. So you're not necessarily going to be naive because you don't call someone a liar when he's not being straightforward with you. He's not a liar necessarily just because he's not straightforward with you. But he could be a trickster. He could be a manipulator. So those are different. Sometimes, for example, a wife knows her husband doesn't lie to her, but he doesn't always tell her something. So what she will do, she'll ask him a question in such a way that he cannot find a way to not be straightforward. Why? Because she knows he's not a liar. He's not going to lie to her. Also, one of the nice benefits from the case of the Mu'an'an hadith is learning about some of why Sahih al-Bukhari is more authentic than Sahih Muslim. One reason is because of how they differed concerning the Mu'an'an hadith. Al-Bukhari says he will not use a chain that is a mu'an'an chain or a chain that has mu'an'ana in it. He will not use a chain that has mu'an'ana in it unless it is confirmed for him that the two narrators who are between this, the word an is between them, that they actually met at least once. If it's not confirmed for him that they met at least once, then he's not going to consider it a connected chain. But be mindful here. We're talking about the book Sahih al-Bukhari, not all the books of al-Bukhari, just this one. This book of Sahih al-Bukhari, he had very tight standards so that you would get just authentic cream of the crop hadiths. What did Muslims say about this case? Rahimahumullah. He said that he will accept, okay, let me just actually adjust my words. Al-Bukhari will not accept for his Sahih, say it that way. Not the way I said it just a moment ago, this way. Al-Bukhari will not accept for his Sahih a mu'an'an hadith, yani a hadith that has an'ana in its chain, unless it's confirmed for him that the reporters in this case met at least once. Muslim, on the other hand, he will accept a hadith that has an'ana in it as long as the narrators are not known to be tricksters. And they lived at the same time. They lived at the same time. So you can see that condition of Muslim is less than Al-Bukhari's condition. Muslim's condition is that they lived at the same time, not that it's confirmed for him that they met. Al-Bukhari's condition, that is confirmed for him that they met. So that's a stronger condition. Therefore, gives more authenticity to the book of Bukhari overall, amongst other things. So if you were to ask, well, how does Muslim patch what Al-Bukhari is trying to avoid here? Muslim accepts as long as it's confirmed that they lived at the same time? Yes. What if they didn't meet? The answer is, and Muslim also considers that they are not tricksters. So if those are narrators who are reliable and precise and are not tricksters, and it's confirmed that these two lived at the same time, and the way the chain is transmitted is from so and so, from so and so, then Muslim will accept. Al-Bukhari won't accept unless it's confirmed for him that they actually met. Yes, so add also to what we are saying. Didn't I say to you that they would take from a trickster if he is explicit about having heard because he's not a liar? Yes. And also, not only that he's not a liar, also actually he is accurate. That part too is important. Also, this trickster, he actually is accurate. Yeah, besides though that he gave you a wrong impression on purpose. The scholars, they said, this is not haram. They said this is disliked. Very disliked. To drop a narrator out in this way without lying, but giving the hearer the impression that you just gave a connected chain of narration. Whether using the word an or using another word that gives the same result. So we'll come back to talk about the tricksters, insha'Allah ta'ala. That has its own chapter. So we're now talking about the Mu'an'an report. And by extension, we talked about the tricksters. But the tricksters and their rigged reports has its own chapter. And we'll stop here for today, insha'Allah ta'ala. Do you have any question I can answer? You said, how do we verify if a hadith is of a certain category of authentic? Is there a catalog or site? There's only two ways to verify that a hadith is authentic. Imam As-Suyuti, he mentioned both of them in a line of poetry. He said, وَخُذْهُ حَيْثُ حَافِظٌ عَلَيْهِ نَصْ أَوْ مِن مُصَنَّفٍ بِجَمْعِهِ يُخَص. This means, take the hadith's authentication from a hafiz, a hadith headmaster. He's higher than a mere muhaddith, hadith scholar. Hafiz. Take its verification from a hafiz. وَخُذْهُ حَيْثُ حَافِظٌ عَلَيْهِ نَصْ. When a hafiz documents its authenticity, like he says, this hadith is authentic. Whether he wrote it in his own book, or he said that and his students documented it about him, and then that was confirmed and logged about him that he authenticated it, then you're going to deem it authentic because of it being authenticated by a qualified hafiz of hadith who explicitly said it's authentic. Sahih. وَخُذْهُ حَيْثُ حَافِظٌ عَلَيْهِ نَفْسٌ. Take it. Take its authentication, that is, where a hafiz has explicitly stated its authenticity. That's one way. أو من مصنف بجمعه يخص. Or take its authentication from a work, an authored work, a scholar's work in which he only logs authentic hadiths. A scholar like Al-Bukhari says, this book of mine, I have not put in it anything but authentic hadiths. Then, since that's what he said, then we know that he doesn't have to say for each hadith, and this hadith is authentic, and this hadith is authentic, and this hadith is authentic. He's telling you, if it's in this book, it's authentic. So then, that's the second way you can verify an authentic hadith. So the authenticity of a hadith is verified in these two ways. If you want to know if a hadith is authentic, then you don't look for a site, for example. Rather, you say to whoever's producing the hadith, who authenticated this hadith? Where can I find the documentation of its authenticity? And if his answer is a correct answer, or an acceptable answer, let's say, if his answer is an acceptable answer, it has to be, he has to be citing a hafiz of hadith and none other. Not a muhaddith, not a faqih, not a linguist, not Al-Albani. You ever see authenticated by Al-Albani, weakened by Al-Albani, suck your teeth at it and roll your eyes at it. And you can scratch it out too. Is that answer clear? You can follow up if you want. You said, so if they tell us Ibn Majah put it in his Sunan, yeah, does not necessarily mean it's authentic, because if Ibn Majah put a hadith in his Sunan, number one, it doesn't mean that he said this hadith is authentic. Number two, the book of Sunan is not dedicated to only authentic hadiths. So that alone is not enough to deem it as authentic. In other words, a scholar's mere documentation of a hadith, even a hafiz, even a hadith headmaster, his mere documentation of a hadith in some book is not an authentication of it. That's why some scholars even compile books of fabricated hadiths, because merely compiling and documenting is not authenticating. But this is a good question here. Another scholar might authenticate something that's in Ibn Majah's book, even if Ibn Majah did not. Still falls under the rule. So, for example, Imam Al-Haythami with a tha, not Al-Haytami with a ta. Al-Haythami, he brings hadiths from many books, from this book, from that book, from this book, from that book. He says, this one's authentic, this one's authentic. He's a hafiz. He did a big job, a very big, important job. Also, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, he would bring hadiths from this book, that book. He would say, this hadith is Hasan, this hadith is Sahih, this one is Sahih, this one is Hasan, from the different books. So, inshallah, that's clear. Wallahu a'lam. Barakallahu feekum.